Another thing that I find really helpful is the concept of backward design. By show of hands, has anybody ever heard of backward design? Okay, cool. I use this for almost every presentation that I build. And backward design is essentially starting with the conclusion, essentially. Like starting with the end point. Like, what do I want my audience to take away? What kind of change do I want to see? Like, if you're at a conference giving a very specific presentation on a specific subject, what is driving you to give that presentation? Like, when you speak to your audience member, what are you expecting them to do? And actually starting with that in your speech ideation process. Right? So it's not just about a topic. Oh, what topic am I going to speak about? And this applies to any class, right? Because you might be in a class that you're, or hopefully since you're in this program, you're interested in all of your classes, right? But you might be in a class where you're asked to give a presentation on something that you're not that interested in, right? But it's important to start with the end goal, right? So like, what do I want my audience to take away? And then work backward. You design backward from that. And I'll show you what that looks like. So these were the writing principles, right? We remember these: the introduction, the presentation overview, the 2 to 3 main points. There's a call to action toward the end, and then the very end is a conclusion. But what if we actually wrote our speeches like this? Like if we were to write, if somebody in this classroom is writing their speech by hand, because I know I have some hand writers in here. If you were to write a speech by hand, what if you started by writing the outcome? Like, what can my audience members do today, tomorrow, next week, next year? And how can I get them to do that, right? What message do I share in order to get them to do that? And then you go to the call to action. Again, that very specific thing. So what outcome do you want to see? What's the call to action? And then when you have the outcome and the call to action, that's when you start formatting your content, right? Like the 2 to 3 main points. Like that's where you start to build your citations, right? That's when you start to talk about specific examples of how policy went wrong or how something was analyzed in previous years or whatever it may, new developments that somebody might need to know about that's very connected to the research question that you have. Like anything in that nature, you have your 2 to 3 main points. And then you can't build your presentation overview without having your speech almost done, really. Like you need to be able to overview what's there and then the introduction, right? And the reason why I use backward design in this is when people usually write speeches, they get stuck on, I call it the syndrome, right? They write the beginning, but then they struggle for 2 hours to figure out what that first sentence is going to be, right? So I don't want us to be in that mindset. Like if you focus on backward design, and you start with the outcome, you start with the change that you want to see, and then you work backward, that could be a really effective strategy for writing your speech. And then there's also problem-centered design, and I've touched on this a little bit already. What problem do I want my audience to solve? Or what problem do I want our society to really think about? Right, so the way that I see this playing out is try writing a how might we question. Like, how might we institute policy in order to reform the prison system? Right, so that could be your leading question. That's your problem, and then then you work backward in order to try to find the solution to that problem. Right, so very similar to backward design. So problem-centered design and backward design are really effective strategies here. Again, how do I get them to see the problem? Right? How do I get the audience to see the problem? And then what can they do in order to help solve it? I'll leave some room for questions if anybody has any questions. Is this clear? Is this helpful to people right now? Okay. Still thinking about it a little bit. All right, cool. Does anybody have any questions so far? No questions? All right, cool. So I'll keep it rolling. Again, so we have our call to action. No matter what type of speech you're giving, you should inspire the listener to do something. If you're in an interview, you should be inspiring the listener to hire you. Right? That's what you want them to do, right? So you want to be able to convince them that I have the skills, the expertise, the experience in order to be able to do this, right? If you're giving a book talk, not only do you want your people, the audience to buy your book, right? But why are they buying the book? Like when they read the book, what are you going to inspire them to do as a result of them reading whatever you've put down on paper, right? So the call to action is very important, and this can look like a simple like a very simple, specific task, and I'll provide an example in just a few minutes. Again, what do I want my audience to think and do? And then what is the shared importance of this topic is another question that should be considered, right? If you're speaking at a conference, there's a shared level of importance of why we're all here in this room, right? Like, you're not just getting people that were forced to come here. Like, if you're speaking somewhere, usually the audience has some sort of vested interest in whatever you're talking about, right? So trying to find the shared importance of the topic that you're addressing. Then we've got our 2 to 3 main points. In persuasive speeches, this looks like argumentative points, right? So thinking about misconceptions that the audience might have, or oppositions that the audience might have to whatever you have to say, kind of telegraphing what the audience might say in opposition to what you're presenting to is very important in a persuasive speech. And then in an informative speech, debunking myths or misconceptions, outlining practical steps and principles, and then explaining something that's very complex. Again, policy can be very multifaceted, so your 2 to 3 main points kind of serve that purpose. Again, a presentation overview is really helpful for people to organize their notes, right? So if you're going into a presentation and you have an activity that's really engaging, you want your audience to kind of be mentally prepared for that, right? Or if you have a long section in your speech where you're going to address a specific topic, somebody can actually organize their notes. Like, all right, like, we're going to talk about writing first. Let me write that at the top. We're going to talk about performance. Let me write that. There's going to be a workshop. Let me prepare my notes for that. So that actually helps the audience format, the information that they're receiving so that they could be able to use that later. And then lastly, the introduction. You always want to say your name, where you're from, your affiliation, your reason for being at the event is helpful, even if you're at like a social mixer, kind of talking about why you're there, how you kind of ran into it. And then it could also be used as an opportunity to build rapport with your audience. And I mean, I use that here by acknowledging that everybody's kind of sitting together, which I thought was pretty cool, right? So also in your introduction, you just want to be, mindful. Just kind of present yourself well. Like, don't have that fourth wall up where you just come up and then you just start speaking again. And then it gets really weird, because it's like, if you never ask the audience anything, or if you never interact with the audience can kind of feel like there's a wall in between you and them, right? So you want to find ways to connect with the audience right away.